Out in the Pacific Ocean, in the quiet waters of Kwajalein Atoll, 3 bronze propeller blades are sticking out of the surface, 15 tons each. Been there since 1946. Below them, upside down on the sea floor, is a 200-meter German warship. A ship that survived everything it was supposed to die from. War, torpedo attacks, air raids, even nuclear bombs. Nothing could sink her. Until something did. But the thing that finally destroyed her was never supposed to destroy anything. The war had a habit of humbling great ships. The Bismarck, unsinkable they said, lasted 8 days at sea before the Atlantic took her. The Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, sank in under 2 hours. The Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, was gone in 3 minutes. But there was one exception, Prinz Eugen. Launched in 1938 in Kiel, Germany, Prinz Eugen was one of the most advanced heavy cruisers the Kriegsmarine had ever built. Over 200 meters long, armed with 8-inch guns and capable of speeds exceeding 32 knots, it was designed for power, endurance, and survival in the harshest naval conditions. And over time, its crew gave it a nickname, the Lucky Ship. It wasn't hard to see why. In May 1941, Germany launched a bold plan to break into the Atlantic and attack Allied supply convoys. Prinz Eugen sailed alongside the battleship Bismarck, heading through the Denmark Strait, a cold and remote stretch of ocean between Greenland and Iceland. The mission was risky, and the British were already searching for them. A reconnaissance aircraft had spotted the German ships, and the Royal Navy moved quickly to intercept. On the morning of May 24th, in freezing fog, the two sides met. On the British side was HMS Hood, the largest warship in the world at the time, and a symbol of British naval power. Within minutes, both sides opened fire. But in the confusion of the fog, something unexpected happened. Prinz Eugen and Bismarck had nearly identical silhouettes at a distance, and British gunners initially targeted the wrong ship. Hood focused its fire on Prinz Eugen, believing it to be Bismarck, while the real Bismarck was left with time to find its range. At 6:01 a.m., that advantage proved decisive. A shell from Bismarck penetrated Hood's deck and detonated its rear ammunition magazine. The explosion destroyed the ship in just 3 minutes, killing 1,415 men. Only 3 survived. When the smoke cleared, Prinz Eugen was still there, undamaged, already slipping back into the fog. The Bismarck was hunted down by the Royal Navy and sunk days later. Prinz Eugen slipped away. In early 1942, it took part in one of the most daring naval operations of the war, the Channel Dash. Alongside 2 German battleships, it sailed through the English Channel in broad daylight, directly under British defences. The operation was considered extremely dangerous. It made it through. Then, weeks later, a British submarine put a torpedo directly into her stern. The explosion tore the rear of the ship apart. By any reasonable measure, she was finished. She was back in service within months. By the later stages of the war, the ship was no longer raiding the Atlantic. Instead, it was used closer to home, providing artillery support for German forces retreating along the Eastern Front. It fired thousands of shells as the war turned against Germany. And through all of it, it kept surviving. By May 1945, as Germany collapsed, the fate of most of its navy had already been sealed. Ships were sunk, scuttled, or destroyed. The oceans that had once carried fleets were now filled with wreckage. But Prinz Eugen remained, one of the only major German warships still afloat, still seaworthy, the Lucky Ship. So now you are probably thinking you know what sank her. 2 atomic bombs. And honestly, that is the answer everyone gives. But that is not what sank her, not even close. When the war ended, the Americans took the Prinz Eugen as a war prize. A US Navy crew sailed her to Philadelphia. Engineers spent months going through every inch of her, most advanced German surface warship they had ever touched. But she was German-built. Spare parts didn't exist in America. She needed a specialized crew. She cost a fortune to run, and by 1946, the US Navy was cutting ships by the hundreds. Nobody wanted her, so they found another use for her. In 1946, the United States was preparing a series of tests designed to answer a question no one had ever faced before. What happens when an atomic bomb is used against a fleet of warships? The operation had a name: Operation Crossroads. To do that, the United States assembled a fleet of target vessels, battleships, cruisers, submarines, and positioned them in the Pacific. Then they anchored the Prinz Eugen roughly 1,200 yards from ground zero. She was not a warship anymore. She was a guinea pig. July 1st, 1946. The first bomb dropped. It exploded in the air above the fleet. The Prinz Eugen bent her foremast, lost the top of her mainmast. That was it. She was fine. 3 weeks later came the second bomb. This one was different. Instead of exploding in the air, it was detonated 90 feet underwater. The explosion sent a column of water over a mile into the sky. It destroyed the ship directly above it instantly. A massive wave of radioactive water swept across everything in the lagoon. When the water settled, the Prinz Eugen was still floating. 2 atomic bombs, the most destructive weapons ever built. She survived both of them. So if it wasn't the bombs that sank her, what was it? When a nuclear weapon detonates underwater, the water itself becomes radioactive. And when that radioactive water washes over every surface, every deck, every bolt, every pipe, it doesn't evaporate off. It bonds to the metal at a molecular level. They tried to clean her. There are actual photographs of sailors on their hands and knees with mops and brushes scrubbing the steel. Some of them barefoot. Barefoot on a radioactive warship, scrubbing with brushes, trying to physically remove something that had bonded to the metal itself. It didn't work. The official decontamination report concluded it was conclusively impossible to remove this type of contamination from metal surfaces. So now you are probably thinking, that is what sank her. The contamination made her impossible to repair. Nobody could work on her. She slowly deteriorated until she went under. That is a reasonable answer. It is also wrong. It is somewhere deep in her hull, there was a small leak. A failed valve. Water slowly entering her machinery space. Under normal circumstances, a 2-hour repair. A welder, a patch, done. But the compartment where the leak was located was so heavily contaminated that nobody could stay inside long enough to fix it. So they towed her to Kwajalein Atoll, 800 miles away, and while everyone figured out the next move, she quietly kept filling with water. December 22nd, a small harbour tug tried to push her into shallow water to beach her. She was 20 meters from shore when she rolled. The Royal Navy couldn't sink her. 2 atomic bombs couldn't sink her. A leaky valve did. She capsized, flipped upside down, and sank in 30 meters of water. 3 propeller blades sticking up into the open air. But sinking was not the end of her story. What happened next, over the 80 years that followed, is the part that nobody saw coming. In the 1970s, the US Army Corps of Engineers sent divers down to properly assess what was left. They took measurements. They tested the radioactivity levels. They tried to figure out what removing her would actually take, and what they found surprised everyone. By then, the radiation had largely faded. The contamination from 1946 had decayed over 3 decades. Divers could work on her safely. The hull was still largely intact, more ship than wreckage even after 30 years on the sea floor. On paper, this looked like a real salvage candidate. Then they looked inside. The Prinz Eugen was not an empty shell. She was a warship that had been abandoned in a hurry. And that meant she still had everything a warship carries. Around 2,800 tons of heavy fuel oil still sealed in her tanks. Just sitting there, in an upside-down ship, at the bottom of a Pacific lagoon. Now think about what it would actually take to remove her. Every cut into the hull is a risk, because you don't fully know what is on the other side. A fuel tank, a corroding shell, a section of structure weakened by 30 years of salt water that collapses the moment you touch it. You cannot just start cutting. Every section has to be carefully assessed before anyone goes near it. And all of this would have to happen underwater, in one of the most remote places on Earth. Kwajalein Atoll sits 4,000 kilometers from Hawaii, with no shipbreaking facilities, no heavy equipment, and no infrastructure to handle thousands of tons of contaminated steel. You would not just be sending a dive team out there, you would be building an entire industrial operation from scratch in the middle of the ocean just to dismantle one ship. The engineers ran the numbers. The cost of the whole operation was nowhere close to being covered by the value of the scrap metal inside her. And she was not blocking anything, not sitting in a shipping lane, not causing any immediate problem that demanded an urgent solution. She was just there, upside down. So they left her, not because she was too radioactive, not because she was too dangerous, because removing her would cost far more than she was worth. And there was no good enough reason to do it. For decades, the wreck just sat there, slowly corroding in the warm, shallow water of the lagoon. Nobody paid much attention. Then by the late 2000s, environmental officials in the Marshall Islands started noticing something troubling. The fuel oil that had been sealed inside her tanks since 1946, around 2,800 tons of it, was starting to seep out. Slowly, quietly, into one of the most biodiverse reef systems in the Pacific. The marine life that had spent 60 years growing around the wreck was now being poisoned by it. The Republic of the Marshall Islands formally asked the United States for help. And in 2018, the US Navy, the same organization that had used her as a nuclear target, abandoned her when she sank and walked away when the numbers did not add up, came back. Think about what that means. 72 years had passed. 3 full generations. The Cold War started and ended. The Berlin Wall went up and came down. The Soviet Union collapsed. The internet was invented and changed everything. And the entire time, 2,800 tons of heavy crude oil had been sitting in the sealed tanks of an upside-down warship at the bottom of a Pacific lagoon. Slowly, quietly, waiting. They used a technique called hot tapping. Divers drilled through the hull in a way that did not release any oil into the water, inserted valves into the holes, and pumped the fuel out through pipes running up to the surface. It was a delicate, painstaking operation. The hull had been corroding for over 7 decades. Every cut had to be precise. Every valve had to hold. One mistake and thousands of gallons of crude oil would pour directly into the reef system they were trying to protect. The operation took 6 weeks. The amount they recovered? 250,000 gallons. From a ship that sank in 1946, sealed in her tanks for 72 years. Still waiting for someone to come back and deal with it. With the oil gone, the immediate environmental threat disappeared. The reef could breathe again, and the last real argument for disturbing the wreck was gone completely. Today, the wreck of the Prinz Eugen lies upside down in the lagoon at Kwajalein Atoll, parts of her hull still breaking the surface, a steel island that shouldn't be there. She's become a dive site. Tourists swim through her corridors. Fish weave through the same gun turrets that once faced down the HMS Hood. Nature has done what nuclear bombs and the Royal Navy couldn't. She's finally, quietly, being taken apart. Just not by anyone's hand. One of her propellers made the journey home. It was salvaged, shipped back across the ocean, and now stands at the Lebeau Naval Memorial near Kiel, the same city where she was built, where workers laid her keel in 1936 and believed they were building something that could not be stopped. It's the only piece of her that ever made it back to Germany. The ocean kept everything else. And maybe that's the most honest ending this story was ever going to get. If you think the Prinz Eugen story is dark, you haven't seen this video yet. 118 men, alive, trapped on the ocean floor.